Well, it's no secret. I consider this to be the best action co-op game on the market. If I had to describe exactly why I love the game as much as I do, I'll have to spend another month or two figuring that out. But to put it simply, my favorite part of DRG is most likely how satisfying it is to kill bugs. From the distinctive splat sound that Glyphid makes when you headshot it, the sweet burst of mouth gibs glazed with green blood on top, to the most satisfying thing in the game for me personally, blowing up a band of Glyphids with a classic PGL, so you can do it more than thrice. Obviously, there's much more at play to my enjoyment here, something that's noticeably remained relatively the same even in the earliest of builds. That being the core gameplay. To summarize it simply, random levels, fight hordes, mine minerals. Last one is arguably the only part of the game's core that's somewhat changed thanks to various mission types. But where did this core idea really start? The Steam store page states that DRG released in 2020, which isn't entirely wrong, but I'm sure most know that early access started in around 2018. Veterans or people that have dug through Ghost Ship Games videos could make a fair assumption that it started in 2016. While that is true for DRG itself, the very core idea was conceived a little earlier. As you might have guessed by now, finding the game's true beginnings will be our main focus. It requires us to delve actually not so deep into the past, just a little bit into the founder-developers' histories. In particular, this suspiciously convenient card I came across in my research will be very useful, since it lists where each founder previously worked. Most notably, everyone but Soren came from Pressplay. Well, this gives us a decent lead. Let's take a look into the so-called Pressplay and the games they've made. Seems like we should start our search exactly there. It was an indie game company that was founded somewhere in 2006. At first taking up on a ton of contract work for other companies. It wasn't up until 2010 when they released their first game, Max and the Magic Marker, which originally was a 2010 WiiWare title, later ported to pretty much everything. To briefly explain the game, anything drawn becomes an interactable physics object. The player then tries to solve various levels utilizing exactly that. I'm not exactly sure how well the game did, but it seemed like it did well enough. For all I know, I'm underestimating how big of a hit it was on WiiWare. And then 2 years later they put out some mobile game called Tentacles, Enter the Dolphin. The gameplay consists of moving through a dolphin's insides as a freaky tentacle microbe. I did actually try to get this to work, but the game is just too old.
What's the tentacle?
In June 2012, Pressplay was picked up by Microsoft. This will be an important note later. For 2013, they released an Xbox One exclusive sequel of that Max game from earlier, Max: The Curse of Brotherhood. Seems like their first full-fledged title, featuring voice acting and 3D graphics. The Magic Marker makes a return, albeit much more limited, only allowing you to interact in specific locations. In 2014, they released 2 games, first one being Tentacles: Enter the Mind. Just like the previous one, it was also mainly a mobile game. Gameplay itself is similar, except the player is now put in a 3D environment. I actually did play this one since you can still download it off the Windows Store for free, and as a real quick review, it's pretty good for a mobile game, I think. You get to upgrade the tentacle thing and move through tons of levels. It's definitely a casual mobile game, but there's a little bit of challenge to it. Despite it actually having some challenge to it, I got bored fairly fast and just sort of started spamming left mouse throughout the levels. Gotta save those million clicks on my mouse or whatever it is they advertise. The other one being Kalimba, rocking a unique art style. It's a short puzzle platformer with interesting co-op elements thrown in there. It can also be played in single player. This is also a Pressplay game that I've played myself, and it's a pretty damn challenging platformer. The main gimmick is having to juggle 2 characters to respond to your inputs at the same time. Admittedly, haven't beaten this, but it seems to introduce a new mechanic almost every level at the beginning. Could be worth a check. That about covers Pressplay's game catalog. Now we've reached the year 2015, just a year before DRG's emergence. It seems around this year they decided to switch into what they call an open development, where the idea is to involve the community with video game production. Wait. It's an interesting experiment they decided to go all out on by coming up with 3 different concepts for games and letting the community vote on their favorite. The winner then continuing with development, while the other 2 projects would either be shelved or put on hold. Let's quickly go through each of these projects and see if we spot anything notable here. Project Karoo is a multiplayer and solo experience where you construct various vehicles which can then be used to travel through an open world in search of special parts and adventures. That's what I was able to get from their deceased website at least. Out of these 3 projects, this one appears to be the most developed when it comes to the visuals and core mechanics. Features various neat concept art teasing upcoming content, one of which is the promise of more biomes. Personally, every time I pick up one of these vehicle sandbox games, I tend to almost immediately put them down. They're just not for me. Disregarding that, it does look pretty good. Project Knoxville is a concept attempting to combine PvP with co-op elements. As in, you're encouraged to work together and to fight each other at the same time. They compared it to Hunger Games. Any players who die are then able to interact with the environment. At this stage of development, they had the basic ability to spawn wolves or medkits. On top of this, each game would have spectators who were able to influence the game by sponsoring or betting, and of course, a promise of a meta-rich upgrade system, whatever that's supposed to mean. To me, this all sounds a bit too ambitious. Like, everything sounds great, but only on paper. These definitely are a bunch of raw ideas thrown in there, hoping they'll stick. I'm sure with a lot of development time, these concepts would mold into something that would work out and wouldn't require a large, active player base. And the last one is Project Dwarka. It's a class-based, cooperative dungeon-crawling horde shooter, and you also play as dwarves. You explore randomly generated caves hunting for gold. Our game director can be seen at the beginning, and... Wait, what's that? Alright, let's cut the act. This is definitely what we've been looking for, and a possible precursor to DRG. It's been a long time. I've lightly teased this video in the comments, in Classified 13, and later in Iceberg 2. But I'm finally ready. I'm ready to do a rundown on Project Dwarka. I'll try my best to respect Dwarka as a separate project while still making connections to DRG. I believe the best way to handle this is to give the comparisons a separate chapter, rather than constantly interrupting the Dwarka rundown with DRG stuff. On PressPlay's old YouTube channel, we are able to find videos and snippets of what seem like 3 different builds of Dwarka. There's possibly more, but they aren't nearly as notable. I want to set some ground rules on how we'll be tackling this situation. Since there are no solid dates to go off of, I'll be numbering these builds in what I assume to be the chronological order. Build 1 will be this procedural cave demonstration. Build 2 will be the Let's Play prototype demo gameplay. I'll be using this as a base point. And build 3 will be the really hard level gameplay. I'll put up some small non-intrusive text at the top left indicating which build is currently being shown. There are likely more builds featured, but there's just not enough hints to determine where those builds stand in the made-up timeline. Alright, starting off the rundown with general gameplay. The dwarves spawn into a hub area of sorts where they get to pick one of 3 missions. From left to right, they're called the Changing Cave, the Gold Tomb, and the Darkness. For this gameplay, they chose the Gold Tomb mission. For the really hard level gameplay, I'd speculate it's the Darkness, although we really have no idea there. The most interesting sounding one is the Changing Cave, but I believe that's more of a reference to the fact that caves are randomly generated rather than one changing in real time. After choosing a mission, the dwarves are then transported to the surface, just outside the cave's entrance. Each dwarf comes equipped with an endless torch and seems like a limited number of lives. Whenever dwarves are incapacitated, they have a limited amount of time to get back up. You also see that Dwarka has a gold frenzy type system, which in short upgrades your character the more gold you collect. Except in Dwarka you can upgrade your weapons and tools via gold collection, in some cases even unlocking abilities. Here's a table of what upgrades I've managed to spot out within the gameplays. There's undoubtedly more that we cannot see in the videos. It's worth noting that in build 3 they added a very minimalistic donkey for resupplying on the surface. Next we're heading into the caves, which do indeed have gold scattered around. To reach a different room, the dwarves have to locate a distinctive patch of dirt and dig through it. Sometimes a room may contain resupply stations. They just sorta spawn in there. Also meatballs, which is normal for caves to have, I guess. As the dwarves stumble through the caves, they'll eventually run into a large tomb, where they'll have to do seemingly a lot of dirt digging. Inside the tomb there are a ton of meatballs, also a motherload of gold. To reach the main loot, the engineer has to construct a bridge or skip it entirely by setting up a ladder. While the construct prompt does show up for the other classes too, they can't actually build the structures themselves. While everyone's collecting the gold, the engineer can then build a large crank, which the dwarves have to physically push to open a large gate. In build 2 there's a resupply station behind the gate, in build 3 it's gold, which honestly makes much more sense. This is where build 2's gameplay video stops. But in build 3 we can see that the dwarves have to run back to the surface through the cave. It's worth noting that the final room and ending sequence is radically different in build 1. For starters, the temple didn't exist yet, but since structures were featured in countless concept art, it was going to happen either way. Instead of having to run back to the surface, there's an exit portal at the bottom of the cave. Near the portal there's a stack of gold in a strange holographic box. I'd speculate that the dwarves would have to deposit a set amount of gold into the box to activate the escape portal. That about covers a general playthrough of a Dwarka mission, and with that out of the way, it's time we cover the classes. Dwarka contains a select of 4 classes, including the Gunner, Engineer, Driller, and none other than this Demolitionist. Each of them carry a pickaxe and throwable flares. Luckily, we get the best view of the Demolitionist class in both gameplays, but due to the layout of these videos, we only get a tiny peek at the other 3. Please excuse the shitty quality when we'll be moving on from Demolitionist. The Demolitionist's loadout consists of Light Bow, appears to hold up to 10 arrows. Its purpose is to provide with large light sources in dark places. Hand Cannon, holds up to 30 rounds. It appears to function similarly to a shotgun. If by similarly, you mean exactly like a shotgun. Grenades can hold up to 6 of them. They appear to be an alternative way of digging through terrain, as demonstrated by the game director. Of course, it also doubles as an attack. This weapon features a weapon charge bar, which is really a cooldown bar so the grenades can't be spammed. The gunner's loadout consists of, again sorry for the low quality, Gatling Bow. Yep, that's the name. Appears to hold up to what seems like 300 arrows. It rapidly fires a stream of arrows and is fairly accurate. The weapon charge acts as an overheat meter for this weapon. Crossbow comes with 100 arrows, an overall basic weapon you'll see used by multiple classes, offers high accuracy but low damage. The engineer's loadout is a bit different from the others, as one of his equipment need to be unlocked via the upgrade system. His inventory consists of crossbow, also comes with 100 arrows and performs exactly the same. Rope ladder carries a whopping 10 of them, can be shot against a wall or ceiling to produce ladders. Barricade can be placed up to 6 times. The barricade damages and slow any enemies that pass through it. The weapon charge also acts as a cooldown meter for this tool. Sentry bow, which can be unlocked upon collecting 40 gold, carries 4 of them. When placed down, it fires arrows at enemies. While the sentry ammo is unknown, it seemingly can be destroyed by enemies. Weapon charge meter acts as a cooldown for this item. The driller's loadout consists of crossbow, same as the others, comes with 100 arrows. Drills. The upgrade suggests that it should have a limited amount of fuel, however I cannot see the fuel counter anywhere. It digs through assumedly various terrain mostly, used for dirt walls in the gameplay videos. The weapon charge acts as an overheat meter. For what I could tell, that's all the available equipment in Project Dwarka. Now it's time to cover floating meatballs. The actual internal name is Evil Eye, but I'll just pretend we don't have access to that information. There appear to be different types of these floating enemies, however no other enemies besides the aerial ones exist. In build 2 it seems that each kill rewards individual players with 1 gold. The best way to tell these meatballs apart are from their colors. First, we got these green or spoiled meatballs with 2 large horns. They'll rush at players and melee attack them with said horns. Wait, are they supposed to be claws actually? The red meatballs come in 2 different sizes. They both charge at players with spikes and explode upon death. The large variation is slower and can dig through terrain in their pursuit. Green and spiky meatballs. They move extremely slow and seem to have the most health. Based on the footage we have to work with, I'd speculate it's meant to be a temple boss, but it's clearly much too slow to be an issue. This next meatball somewhat resembles a brain with a set of mandibles. They pose as a ranged threat to the dwarves, purposefully staying back and firing at them. Finally, we come to the red blobs, which act as a stationary meatball spawner. Despite this, we cannot actually see spawning any enemies within the available footage. And there's nothing else I could really dig up from what I have to work with, putting the rundown to a close, which means it's time for a retrospective. Specifically in retrospect to DRG, with a little injection of my own personal thoughts. First, the setting, and I'm gonna go on a tangent here. Dwarka and DRG seem to be opposites in this scenario. Whereas Dwarka is in a fantasy medieval setting, DRG is in a sci-fi space setting. The donkey outside on the surface swapped out for a robotic mule. It could also be argued that the overall feel has also been inverted. Dwarka is overall much darker. Biggest examples for me being the overly green text whenever the player is incapacitated and the gloomy concept art. While the pre-alpha definitely maintained some of it, the feel very slowly inched to the lighter side during the closed alpha phase. Then it got a noticeably large change in tone for the early access launch and only became progressively more lighthearted from there. With the additions of meme voice lines, being able to pet things, and letting you befriend enemies. While I do like to wonder what a pre-alpha setting non-meme influenced DRG would be like, I'd imagine the dwarves would actually banter between each other while fighting horrific bugs. With that said, I don't hate the current direction that the game's been headed in. Hey, Hollowbow tiptoes around the darker undertones if anything. Besides Hollowbow, I like to think that Betsy was the final addition they made in spirit of the old style. The ominous beeping when you first discover it, the strange parasite that's capable of controlling machines. The thing that's come closest to this since were abandoned resupplies, but that was a recycled idea from Salage's development, so it makes sense. I've seen plenty of comments throughout the years praising the darker undertone of the pre-alpha builds. As it turns out, I kinda over-exaggerated those comments in my head. Really, I think I found only like a few comments that were directly praising the darker undertones. Most of the comments were really just pointing out that, hey, the game was a lot darker back then, which isn't necessarily praising it. But the rest of this thought is still valid. I've always sat in the middle of it, but as of writing the script, I realized that I struggled to say anything positive about the current feel of the game. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind the silly additions, but I don't like them either. Perhaps it was a necessary direction to take for consumer appeal. Perhaps the caves wouldn't look as pretty. Perhaps the gameplay would have never flourished. Perhaps I need to stop asking unanswerable questions and move on to the next point already. The core gameplay loop seems to have remained relatively similar with one large adjustment, that being timed waves. In Dwarka there's a fixed number of enemies with a few spawners here and there. After reaching the temple, it seems like mini waves start spawning. In DRG's pre-alpha, the spawners are sort of put on a pedestal, making them the largest threat if not quickly taken care of. Mini waves now happen periodically at all times. While in modern DRG, we get to deal with both mini waves and large waves, which are dynamically adjusted each mission. Spawners are now reduced to the occasional stationary threat, producing smaller versions of swarmers. When it comes to fixed enemies, they are still in the game, but they are now mostly a threat at the start of the mission, especially in point extraction or salvage operation. The Demolitionist class appears to have been split up between the current DRG classes. Engineer getting a grenade launcher and Driller getting the C4. Could also argue Gunner got a cluster nade. It is worth mentioning that there is evidence this class was planned very briefly for DRG as well, since there were voice lines written and possibly recorded for it. Just keep in mind this experimentation was done somewhere in 2018, which is before they added any new weapons to the game. The escape sequence in Dwarka's Build 1 is fairly reminiscent of the pre-alpha, as the drop pod tries to arrive as close to the dwarves as possible with no need for backtracking. Coincidentally, both games later settled on a backtracking escape sequence instead. An in-game hub area acting as the main menu seems to have carried over from Dwarka as well. In some very messed up perspective, you could say this is the pre-alpha rig. Please actually don't. Despite all this, on the very surface, Project Dwarka looked like yet another Minecraft clone. You can't say the devs didn't try to convince people of otherwise. They did put out a video of what the art style they're actually going for. On top of that, it was 2015. Minecraft clones were simmering down at this point, but frankly, it was still annoying to see them. When it came to community votes, however, Dwarka got last place, losing to Project Knoxville. But hey, it's fine. It was just an experiment to involve the community into. This familiar game director will get to direct Knoxville anyway. Knoxville had a closed alpha situation and was honestly making decent progress. They would try to actively update on the game's development via their YouTube channel. Later they moved into new, spacey offices and continued work on the project. They showcased this honestly interesting sounding drone system. Everything seemed great until... On March 10th, 2016, Pressplay gets shut down as part of Microsoft's cost reduction. Everyone working there were now unemployed. Project Knoxville was cancelled and all the other IPs and prototypes are left to idle. What now?
Ghost Ship Games began as another company was closed down. Yeah. A group of us got together and said, hey, this is actually really sad, but it's also a great opportunity for us to start our own game company. And we had this idea for a game, which we then said, hey, let's start doing this.
I'm sure most of you have already guessed what game he had in mind at that exact moment. And with that, they almost instantly got to work on it. Like, I want to hammer home how quickly they turned around. The first in-game build of DRG was... Oh wait, I can't really show that. Huh, almost forgot. It is very worth noting, however, that the first in-game build was made as early as March 19th. That is 2 weeks after the Pressplay shutdown. Also, trust me when I say, you're not missing much. The footage doesn't even remotely resemble DRG. I believe at this time it only had its internal name, which was FSD. FSD in reality stands for 4 Short Dudes. Honestly, for a while I thought it was Fat Space Dwarves. Don't ask. But the game at this point really wasn't anything more than 75% Unreal Engine's first-person preset and 25% poorly generated terrain.
The thing was that when we started out, we were 5 people starting out, and we were 3 programmers, our art director, Robert, and then me as game director, level designer, everything else. And we quickly saw that we needed someone to take the role of being a CEO. Yeah, I knew Søren from back at Deadline Games, and we gave him an offer to come and join us.
And I said yes. Very quickly, I kind of decided that that was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for me, maybe my last time to be part of a startup like this. And the situation was, of course, we needed some money.
Yes.
That's what you really need when you start a company, especially because we are so old. All of us, so we have kids and houses and lots of money that needs to be paid.
Yeah.
I was very motivated to go out and get some funding. And to do that, we needed some kind of proof that what we worked on was not just kind of something we made up.
Yeah, you can.
That was
Yeah,
something.
but we also needed to prove that we were professional game developers and that we could actually execute a game. So we immediately started working on a prototype of the game.
Just within 7 weeks of Pressplay shutting down, they already had a promising prototype ready, able to demonstrate a core gameplay in a procedurally generated level. The video starts off with the game director showcasing the available equipment. The revolver and shotgun combination, which we now know as DRG's Super Shotgun. The yellow flare gun for lighting dark caves, regular flares, a heavy machine gun or minigun, very first drill prototype, and of course, a pickaxe. Then perfectly circles into demonstrating the destructible terrain, the classic dirt wall indicating that you're about to enter a new room, and showcasing the most primitive version of Glyphids, which of course didn't have a proper name at the time. Then the video ends with dwarves mining gold terrain. Alongside the procedural video, they also had a mock-up level ready. Finally, this video is 40 minutes older than the procedural one. The purpose of this video was to demonstrate what kind of cave appearances they were aiming for. The environment here was handcrafted in 3ds Max. At the time they thought achieving anything close to this was all but a dream. In my opinion, they've exceeded past beyond this mock-up in modern DRG. While going through the level, the art director explains they want for flares to be a precious resource and the concept of needing resupplies.
Right now we're in developer mode, so we have plenty of flares each, but we want light basically to be a precious resource. You want to manage your lighting because you can run out.
The video then cuts to a different clip, this one demonstrating the early ending sequence. You'd need to call down a drop pod via a beacon and deal with a large horde of enemies. That up there is the earliest iteration of a drop pod. It seems like a bunch of resupply pods stitched together. I'd speculate the original model for the draw pod looked like the resupply pod.
So we presented this, and it worked. It got the attention of for both where we sort of grant and for the investment. So seeing that tech working and see what we could, the potential that we could do with that, the terrain tech, we got very confident that this was now a realistic project for us to lift. We had decided to go for early access because we needed to go to the market pretty fast. Also because even though we got some money, they would run out at some point. So if we could get some traction, it would be easier for us to attract more attention and more money.
I actually think from the beginning we also wanted to do this open development, as we call it, because we simply think that it was super nice to not hide what we are doing from our audience, our players, and just be frank about what we're doing and freely talking about
both you and I have been in companies where everything was secret and you can't talk about it, and for years you're kind of just, you don't know if this is something people will like or not, and you're not getting any, you're getting feedback, but it's always like kind of artificial. It's people you bring in, and it's Then we needed to create some more specific like marketing material, you can say.
And based on what you just saw, so we actually made a trailer for that. And we didn't really had made our breakthrough yet in the tech side, in the look of the game.
GSG's next goal was to gain some traction for the project. Of course, additional funding was also needed. And so, they got to work on DRG's previously unseen first trailer. This trailer was made just 3 weeks after the procedural level video. They've definitely made progress on the cave appearances, resembling the modern game a tiny bit more. Around this time, they also implemented the cave leech for the first time, and got some basic glyphid AI working, as well as swarmers, praetorians, and most notably, huge praetorians. Interestingly, it seems that gold works completely different in this build specifically. But of course, as we all know, this trailer never went live, and there's a good reason for it. They made some interesting progress on their procedural generation, figured out how they could convert models into terrain, but this was only the start of their procedural breakthroughs.
A month after we finished that trailer, we had a very big breakthrough in our tech and how the look of the game was. And then we quickly decided that, hey, now the game looks so much better than before we made the first trailer, so let's redo the trailer. And we made an exact copy of that trailer where we re-recorded almost one-to-one all the shots in it.
They opted for remaking the trailer nearly shot for shot and releasing that one instead, which was completed in September of 2016. While that's a large chunk of time from the previous trailer, which is about 4 to 5 months I think, the amount of progress made during that period speaks for itself. There are now classes with distinctive abilities. Caves look less like a concept prototype and more like an actual game. I should know. I have the pre-alpha.
It was an incredibly important piece of trailer and asset, marketing asset for us. And creating this trailer not only learned us that the game would be fun, but also that we, when we started showcasing it, that there were a lot more interest in this project than we had ever.
And it actually worked so well for us that publishers or people in the business were paying notice to it. And discovered it by themselves without us reaching out. And that's actually how we got in contact with Coffee Stain, who is our publisher now and so investor in the company.
They instantly, we could feel that they were, we were just in sync with them. We were just talking very easily together, and we had the same goals. We also had some history that was the same. They were also using Unreal. They had done their first game where Sanctum was a co-op first-person tower defense shooter. So with their fame from Goat Simulator, we thought that they could help us for sure bring this game to market and at least be for us, a very, very good partner to collaborate with, and that has been proven right.
Yeah, I think so.
Yes.
That's pretty much when they got picked up by a publisher. From here on out, I don't consider DRG stories so hidden anymore and feel like the developers themselves tell it best. But what about press play? Well, another portion of ex-press play developers also founded a new game company called Flashbulb. Then they got to work on what became Trailmakers, which shares a very similar backstory to DRG. I mean, that Project Karoo prototype looks really familiar out of a sudden. Pressplay was later acquired by Flashbulb, meaning that a portion of the original developers got their assets back in the end. In retrospect, it's astounding that such a random experiment from long ago spawned the two games which failed the voting process. The prototype which won is yet to see the light of day. The prototype to get second place eventually became Trailmakers, a somewhat successful sandbox title, and lastly, the prototype which placed last eventually became one of the best co-op experiences made by indie developers. Deep Rock Galactic.
So, thank you, Mikkel. Have a flare in the face.
Thank you.